Alice Franklin has the very first question, and hers is, did Jodi switch universes so that she could create the Time Police?
The short answer is no, I didn't. I switched universes so that I could kill Max. And then as I was, which I did, and then I thought, I can carry on with this. So I did. And I had already several times thought how irritating St Mary's must be to hard-working time police officers who are just trying to keep the timeline straight. And so roundabout, I think it's the fourth book, they made their first appearance and have been with us ever since. But I didn't switch universes and go through all that trouble and kill all those people just so I could introduce the time police. So sorry about that.
Good question though, thank you. Sarah Pennington, are you here, Sarah Pennington? No, this is one from the internet then. Are the Time Police loosely based on any particular police force?
I don't know what sort of police force Sarah Helen Pennington is accustomed to. That is actually quite worrying, and I'm upset she's not here because I wanted to question her closely. But the answer to that is no. Because of author ignorance, I don't actually know any police forces that well. I just, as I always do, made them up as I went along. And I wanted to set the scene for this really rather awful set of people who, to be fair, were doing what was necessary to rectify the situation. But when I really started getting into the Time Police, I brought them forward a little, and the time wars were over and they'd more or less won and the situation was under control. And now comes the really difficult bit. You've won the war, and then after that you have to win the peace. And all the people who had served so faithfully with the Time Police, who weren't possibly quite socially acceptable in this brave new world, they all had to be slowly eased out. And so I started the first Time Police book in a world where they had a new commander, Commander Hay, and she was slowly imposing herself on the Time Police, easing out all the people she didn't really want any longer. So it's a time of great transition, and I'd made them rather horrible, but I found as I wrote more and more about them and got to know them better that they weren't actually that bad. And one of my proudest achievements is to have everybody hate Lieutenant Grint and then spend 3 or 4 books rehabilitating him. And now he's pretty much everybody's favourite character. So manipulate me.
I think when Jodi first started to talk about writing the Time Police series alongside St Mary's, we were naturally quite nervous that a lot of readers who had hated the Time Police wouldn't really want to switch over and enjoy the books. What was your reaction? Were you nervous, or how did people feel about it?
Because Max had the same view and has kind of moved along with it. You kind of go with Max's view that she hates them, then she just kind of tolerates them and some of it. I think we'll move in the same direction alongside her.
Yeah.
I started them determined not to like the Time Police, but you can't do that with Judy. Because she sucks you in and you're there walking the corridors with them, and you can't hate them because you're alongside them.
I'm really trying hard not to look smug. It's not working.
So I don't think that we could have possibly hated the Time Police more than we did at the end of Hope for the Best, which I'm sure you did on purpose because that's when the first Time Police book came out.
I did, yeah. Max had done.
Lots of people say they wouldn't read it, but I'm sure they have by now.
Max did everything asked of her, and then at the end, the Time Police turned around and said no. And she had to go, I'm trying not to give any spoilers here, and she had to go off and sort the situation herself. And I thought, yes, that is really strategically the best thing to do, but personally and socially, and it's really not a nice thing to do at all. So having left them on that pinnacle of nastiness and thoroughly enjoyed writing every word of it, I then picked them up in doing time and had to work very hard to rehabilitate them in your eyes.
Yes. But you knew they couldn't be all bad because Matthew was going to join us. you knew that there must be some good in them, because otherwise you would never have wanted to go there and make a separate life then.
Even though she has invaded up a few times.
Right, back to the next question. So David Dickens asked quite a complicated one.
Yes.
There's this weird relationship between St Mary's in Matthew's time and Matthew's time police in the future time. It's as if these two periods of time are anchored together for a reason, even before Matthew was born. But I'm curious if this version of the time police ever interact with the time police from their future. Confused? You will be. Are time police officers from other times and other universes running their own missions?
I read it through several times, and I think I do know what he's asking. And my initial thought was, well, no, obviously not. And then I got to thinking about it, because we have had several future St Mary's. There is no reason to assume, now that the secret of time travel is out, that there will never be a need for the time police. So I sat down and had a bit of a think about this. It is possible that some version of a future time police might one day make an appearance, whether for good or ill. I haven't decided yet. It depends how much the world has annoyed me recently. But it is a very interesting thought, and I am going to give it some thought. Yeah.
Has anyone got a question from the audience? Yes, please.
Mary, have you got a particular invention that you've come up with in that world that you'd most like to see happen?
I've actually, not me personally, but I've done a bit of research over the months, and Mikey is going to come up with a string genuinely designed to be helpful equipment, but for some reason or other, and not always her fault, it doesn't go quite well. And in this one, excuse me while I stroke my in this one, I'm not giving away too much of the plot, but time police officers have been complaining for some time that their string that they spray over their prisoners to immobilise them doesn't harden quickly enough. So Mikey obviously bends her powerful intellect to this problem and comes up with what she calls, with great originality, rapidly hardening string. And a number of officers, because this is quite an important project for them, volunteer to take part and stringed. And some of them are stringed as they run, some are stringed to the floor, some are stringed to the walls, some are stringed to the doors. Poor Officer Curtis, I think it is stringed face down and is rather in the humpback bridge position. And there are a lot of indelicate comments about that. And everything is fine until it dawns on quite a considerable number of immobilised officers that the string is not softening at all in any way. Mikey, of course, comes up with a brilliant idea to rectify the situation. You'll have to read the book to find out. But I have all sorts of ideas for technical things in the future, or things that we wish we had now. But being the time police and being Mikey, who the time police generally reckon is St Mary's agent of destruction, sent to kill them all, nothing will ever go right. And at the moment, I'm writing for Time Police 6, a bizarre episode which features the unfortunate Officer Curtis, some shrink wrap, and half a pound of chipolata sausages. So that's turning out to be quite good fun.
Speaking as a woman of a certain age who can't go far without finding a toilet, are they ever going to get a toilet in the halls?
Yes, they are. I'm not going to say it's ever going to work properly. It will be as eccentric as the rest of them. I've got to be careful, because as Commander Hayes says in the one after this, I really do feel that enough humour has been wrung from the toilet situation, but that will turn out not to be the case at all.
I've been doing my usual reread, so this is a complete re-listen, I should say. And I was listening to the one with Mr. Jeffrey. Sorry, I'm reading about it. And I listen to them, so I don't read them quite many books I hope. Is it Jeffrey as in Jeff or Ge? Because one of them is distinctly more slimy in my head. I can't
They are both G-E-F. F.
I think they're the same person. Are they the same person?
Well, no, it was Mr. Jeffrey who was in the timepiece. He was smarming over everybody, and that was the spelling I thought it was.
You're not going to tell us if they're the same person.
No, I'm going to sit here and grin at you. There is an answer. I'm not sure whether to give it because I'm not sure that Jeffrey will or will not make an appearance in the future. And I don't want to queer his pitch. But he was just so unpleasant and oily, and yeah, he's a great character to write, actually.
Right, so Chris Coopage asks, and again another rather complicated one, bear with me as I read this one out. Do the time police have to track which exact times in the past they have visited, like they do at St Mary's, assuming the rule that you cannot occupy the same time in two places rule holds, as that seems like it needs a department of its own. I'm not sure the actual people in the clean-up crews, etc., will be able to do so. Has this ever been a problem? Or will this be a spoiler question you can't answer?
No, not really. Obviously, they can't be in the same time twice, even if they're in a different position. It's the same universe and the same rules apply. And besides, as an author, I wring an awful lot of drama out of not being in the same time twice. And if they suddenly turn out to be able to be in the same time twice, I'm going to have to go hunting for more material, which I really don't want to do. Yes, obviously, because there are so many of them and their lives are so complicated, there is a department that keeps track of their movements, and they have AI, which I casually invented 5 years ago now when I wrote Doing Time and never really thought anything more about it. And of course the usual Taylor curse has struck, and now AI is everywhere, and it's going to take over the world, and it's going to be like the Terminator all over again, and it's probably all my fault because everything I write comes true. So I am about to embark on a book in which there is an unprecedented period of world peace, because I think we deserve it quite honestly. I think that answers just about all of it. Oh yes, the clean-up crews. No, they don't keep their own records. And I have a question for you, actually. I have been giving some thought to the clean-up crews, especially clean-up crew 29, whom you haven't met yet. And I wondered whether there would be any interest in a short story about the clean-up crew. I suspect they get a really bad press, and they're not quite like as everybody thinks they are. They're not knuckle draggers or anything. But yeah, I think I could get some mileage out of a clean-up crew, actually. Yeah.
Would that be a Christmas story? It doesn't sound very Christmassy.
Very Christmas.
It will snow. That will make it Christmassy. Yeah, I mean, I've really done sort of every variation of Christmas stories. So basically now what I'm doing is a story at Christmas before I go insane, because it's becoming more and more difficult. I've exhausted all the events that happened on Christmas Day, and believe me, I have looked. I've had all sorts of what happened on this day sites, and I'm pretty well exhausted. So I think we're going to have to maybe look at areas where it's a story at Christmas, or maybe a story for Christmas. We'll see. But I haven't forgotten you. This year's Christmas story is already written, and I think we're editing it at the moment, aren't we? And I happen...
This is where I do the sales pitch. It's called Lights, Cameras, Mayhem, and it's going...
Calvin Cutter's back. He's remaking the Fall of Troy in his own version, and obviously it all goes horribly wrong, because why wouldn't it? And I've got an idea for the next Christmas story as well, so I'm well ahead in that area.
Excellent.
What's to change from what you first write after it's gone through all the processes?
I have to be quite careful. No, I send off the story. I triumphantly type the end. I type all the dedications and the explanatory notes and the excuses and the apologies and everything, and I send it off to Headline, who make their will upon it and send it back to me with a number of suggestions, amendments, alterations. About 95% of which I do accept. There's always 2 or 3 that we have a bit of an argy-bargy over, because that's traditional. But yes, I've never ever have I had to do a huge rewrite. It's more tweaking. And when you write a story, because I've been with it for sort of 3 or 4 months, immersed in this story, you do miss things. And sometimes, you know, my editor will come back and say something like, yes, you've got him coming through this door, but in the last 3-4 paragraphs ago, you had him going upstairs into the bedroom. And I think, oh, dummy. So editing is really, really useful. They're very good with my scattergun approach to commas. I never paid attention at school because I couldn't see that the use of commas was ever going to be important to me. So I just stared out the window and twiddled my hair for half an hour. Now, of course, commas are very important, and it's not a good idea. There are about 40,000 commas in a book, and it's not a good idea to put them all on the first 3 pages to get them out of the way. So I've had to stop doing that as well. So editing, very helpful. And I have excellent editors at Headline, and I would be an idiot not to listen to what they've got to say, actually. And sometimes I will say, no, I want it this way because in 2 books' time I'm going to do this or that or the other. So we've not actually yet come to blows.
Which is a good thing.
Which is a very good thing, yes.
Hello, yes.
Hello. The world of St Mary's and the world of the time piece, you've almost like bracketed the time warp, and then gathering that the next St Mary's book is going to start to go into that a little more and fill in that area in between. Is that proving difficult, or did you kind of have it all planned out in your head before you began?
Oh God, no, I never plan ahead. Seriously, I'm famed for it. I've left St Mary's in a fairly peaceful state, and I'm concentrating more on the Time Police at the moment. I have had thoughts about writing the Time Wars. I'm not so sure about it though. It's a little bit, I can't see my path through it, if you see what I mean. Maybe with more thought it will. But I always believe in going forwards, and I'm going forwards with the Time Police now. There will be at least one more St Mary's book. You'll know when the last one comes along because I'm going to call it an honour and a privilege.
Well, I mean, the next one, 15, St Mary's 15, is not called an honour and a privilege.
No, it's not. You can relax.
Going back to the Christmas stories, we had one Time Police one, Santa Grinch. Yeah. This one's going to be back to St Mary's. Do you all enjoy the Christmas stories?
Yes.
Who's got, what are your favourite ones?
When a child is born, I think.
Oh, the first one?
Yeah, I really love it. I just like how it tied into, you know, something seemingly so unimportant, which I know is a theme that runs through so much, but that, yeah, I really like it.
That was a trial to me. I got to the end of the story and then thought, well, you know, I need a reason for what happened, and I researched for ages and ages and ages, looking for a reason why the event was so important. Sorry, I'm trying not to do spoilers again. I came across the splendidly named Laurentia Hennigowan, who was somebody of some importance and an important ancestress. And the name, for some reason, has stayed with me. I mean, it's a fabulous name. Who wouldn't want to be called Laurentia Hennigowan? I've got an idea for a character who might appear in 1 or 2 stories later on, and that arose out of When a Child is Born, because I was panicking because I couldn't find an ending for the story.
The ladies who joined us that haven't read these books, I'll just explain that when Jodi and I first worked together, because I used to be her publisher before she went to Headline, and I had a small independent publishing company, and we were a little bit maverick. Our theory was we didn't really know what we were doing, so we could just make it up as we went along.
Yes, and do it until somebody told us to stop.
And it worked quite well, to be honest, because we just, you know, did crazy things. And no one publishes a book on Christmas Day, because no one's going to read a book on Christmas Day, is the perceived wisdom. And so we started this tradition where, as well as, you know, main books coming out during the year, Jodi writes a Christmas story that gets published on Christmas Day. And entirely the wrong thing to do. You're not meant to do it at all, but it's become a real tradition, and everyone loves it because it's not a particularly long story, and you can always save it for when the family have all gone to sleep after lunch or something. but it has so popular, hasn't it?
It's become part of people's Christmas traditions.
Yeah. So sometimes it's nice to just do it all wrong, and it works really well. Right, should we have another question?
Yes, go on then.
Okay. So Helen King actually asked 3 questions. The first one is, will we find out more about what happened to Commander Hay, Captain Farrington and the others back in the First Time Wars? Their younger selves, I mean.
I sometimes wonder if Helen King is bugging my desk. Helen King. I don't want to give too much away because I'm writing it at the moment and I'm not sure, as usual, in which direction it's going to go. It's completely unexpected, obviously. Yes, something happens in this book that harks back to an incident in the Time Wars, because I've spent some time making them reasonably nice people now. As we've got to know them, they're not as bad as we quite thought they were. But the Time Wars, you can't get away from it, were a pretty dreadful time, and they had to do things that they might not have done in peacetime, but you know, things happen in war. And there is an incident in this story that will carry on into Time Police 6. My usual thing, because I haven't thought of a way to finish it off in that book, so I've had to finish it off in this book. And we will, I hope, get a sense of how desperate things were for them in the Time Wars, at a period when they were down to very nearly single figures worldwide, and they were just losing on all fronts. Don't panic, it's not uncheerful, although I'm hoping it's a little bit scary. So we will find out a little bit about Commander Hay and her face. We will find out a little bit about Lieutenant Callan, as he was then, and the senior mech, makes an appearance. So I hope that you will enjoy that when I eventually get round to finishing it off. What was her second question?
Our second question is, how did the Time Police make sure St Mary's personnel visit them in the correct order? Do they have to constantly synchronise calendars?
No, this is down to the author, who can't cope with anything complicated. And so rather than have huge explanations, and the first question my editor always asks me when she receives a manuscript is, where does this fit in the timeline? And as usual, I haven't given it any thought at all. So I have simply assumed that the St Mary's timeline is moving forward at the same pace as the Time Police timeline, because the thought of my non-scientific mind trying to explain anything different for 5 or 6 closely packed pages, I don't want to do that, and I don't think you want me to do that either. So we just take it for granted that they proceed at the same time.
This is the third question, and this one could possibly be a bit of a spoiler.
Go on then.
Is John Treadwell actually Major Callan? Yeah? After silence on that one then.
Would you like him to be?
No.
I'm sorry, I can't answer that one. Sorry.
I have a question for you.
Go on then.
Can I have a pay rise? No. No, my question for you is, this is such an iconic building and is the home for the Time Police headquarters. What made you choose that?
Oh, this goes back donkey's years to when I was young and I was in the Air Force. And one day I blagged a trip on a helicopter and we set off from RAF Odium in Wessex, flying tomb, and we flew across country, and the plan was that we would fly up the River Thames and do a practice touchdown at Battersea Power Station. So we flew up the Thames. God, it was cold, because if you fly over water, you have to have the door open so that if you ditch, you can get out, because if you ditch and the door's shut, you can't get the door open because the pressure isn't equal on both sides. They explained to me very cheerfully. And I was, at this point, I was beginning to think whether an afternoon at work wouldn't have been a better bet after all. So we donned cold weather gear, life jackets, helmets, intercoms, piled into the back of this helicopter. And of course, the pilot, in the way of helicopter pilots everywhere, was whizzing, swooshing us about the countryside, and I'm slowly turning green because I don't travel well. I really don't travel well. And we flew up the river, which was fascinating and cold and drafty, and we did this practice touchdown at the front where the deck chairs are now, and it was a rubble-filled patch with old slag heaps, piles of coal, and this dreadful, dirty, monumental brick building behind it. And its chimneys weren't working properly, and they were all at angles. And I think it hadn't been decommissioned at the time, but it wasn't what you look to see in a power station, quite honestly. But despite all that, it was this absolutely fabulous, monumental building, and we sat there with the door open, and I was craning my neck trying to see the top of it because it is just huge. And I didn't at the time think, oh, this building is going to be very important in my life one day. I'm not sensitive enough for that. I'm thinking, oh God, I'm cold, let's go home. But it stayed with me, it always stayed with me. It was such an image. And then I came to visit my son who lives in London, and we came past this, and I thought, oh, there's Battersea Power Station. It's still here, and it was in an even worse state by then. And I think they'd actually taken the chimneys off. And somebody said, oh no, it's going to be redeveloped and it's all going to be knocked down. And I was heartbroken. And then it had a reprieve, and they said, no, they're going to develop it, and they're going to do it really sensitively. And yes, there will be all sorts of accommodation around it, but the power station will stand in its own space, 4 square to the river, like it always does. Chimneys put back, and I think it's listed now as well. And I was so pleased, and I would come and visit the offspring, find an excuse to come up here, watch them put the chimneys back on, watch it all slowly grow, watch the giant cranes heaving the stuff around. By this time I was looking for a headquarters for the Time Police. Frankly, where else would it be? I think, the Time Police and Battersea Power Station are just made for each other. So sorry, that was a really long answer, but
if you haven't gone up in lift 109, do. It's amazing.
Oh God, yes.
It is absolutely fantastic.
A warning now, I've warned people already this evening. I was wildly excited, and there are 5-year-olds in the film who are behaving with more maturity than I am. I am just, fangirl squealing.
Talking about your RAF days, and this is nothing to do with the Time Police, just going off tangent. Have any of you heard the panda story from Jodi's RAF days?
Yeah.
Oh, I think they'd like to hear.
It seemed a very long time, and I think I wasn't alone in that point of view, actually. I'm the person who actually inadvertently put all of southeast England on high military alert. And then 20 minutes later did it again. Apparently I'm unique. The panda story does not reflect well on me. I don't know if anybody here is as old as I am and remembers the 3-day week when we had no power. Well, as an RAF unit, I was at West Drayton at the time, part of the air traffic military thing. And as a military unit, we were allowed to have power. We could have our electric on all the time because we were special. But the station commander was a sensitive soul, and he said, no, people, it's not good for people to see the place lit up. You'll be in the dark, everybody else. And our WAF block was a kind of race course layout with bathrooms and washing rooms in the middle and the accommodation around the outside. So the accommodation had the windows and the bathroom was in darkness. And we couldn't have the lights on, so we were sort of bathing by torchlight or matchlight or candlelight or whatever. We couldn't have the television on, and basically I was bored. And accompanying me through my RAF career was a giant 6-foot panda that I bought from somewhere called Socrates, and he'd been all over the place with me, and he was beginning to look rather the worse for wear. So I thought, in lieu of anything happening, I would give him a bath. So I went in, lit a candle, filled up the bath, picked up this giant panda and threw it in, chucked in some fairy liquid, gave him a rub, jumped up and down on him, pulled out the plug and realised at that point that 6-foot waterlogged panda is immovable. There was no way I could get it out. And I had what I thought at the time was rather a good idea. I pulled the plug out and just left him face down on the bottom of the bath to drain down the plug hole. Unfortunately, somebody came in after me and wanted to use the bath, came in with their candle, took one look at this dim figure face down at the bottom of the bath and thought somebody had drowned. And she rang the alarm. I'm in my room, I'm not realising this was anything to do with me, and I heard all these people pounding up the stairs, and I heard a lot of shouting. And then this voice, obviously officer commanding the WAFs, bellowing, "Bring me the head of SACW Taylor." And I thought, oh shit, I'm in trouble here. So she came in and she said, what was I doing, etc., etc. Get it out of the bath now. So I did. So everybody came off high alert, and I and my unfortunate roommate lugged this soaking wet panda into our bedroom. And I had what I thought was another brilliant idea. And I got a pair of tights and I tied it round his neck. And I said, open the window. And they opened the window and we tossed him out. And he was going to hang there and drip dry. And unfortunately, RAF West Drayton was in the middle of a housing estate. And about 1,500 people dialed 999. And the next thing I know, bloody OC WAF is pounding up the stairs again, shouting. And I legged it. It was a race course, and she came round that way, and I went that way. And spent about 2 hours in the naffy, just hiding until things calmed down. And we got him back in again. And he took about 6 weeks to dry out. But that was my card marked for pretty much all of my stay there. And I still maintain that for the most part I was completely blameless.
I think also the RAF has influenced things like the FOD and the plod.
Oh yes, you always did a FOD plod.
Yeah.
A pod plod I made, but FOD plod actually you still do.
Do you want to explain what that is to the people who haven't?
Foreign object damage.
Yes.
So if you're in a helicopter or a jet intake and it gets sucked up. As a WAF, when I was out on the aircraft pan, you're not allowed to put hairpins in your hair because if the one drops out and it gets sucked into an air intake. So you've got to be really careful what's lying around on an aircraft pan. So we regularly did FOD plods.
Do you think there's other things in your past that have kind of infiltrated your books without you really realising? But, I mean, I think some of your time running the library services, the facilities manager.
Oh yeah. Yes, I managed a team of Bolshie Yorkshire drivers, which gave me lots of clues for St Mary's personnel. So yeah, I'm not Max, but some of the things that happened to her have happened to me in a slightly different way. Yeah. I researched that. I don't just throw these books together. And I researched that.
What happened to Socrates, your panda?
He fell apart in the end. He went with me everywhere. He did not survive. Shortly after leaving the Air Force, he did fall apart. He hadn't been well treated, I have to say. Drowned, crushed, hung.
Yes?
I've got two questions, is that okay?
Of course.
The first is, did you always intend for Matthew to be part of the Time Police?
Matthew complicated things enormously because, as usual, I hadn't planned ahead at all. And the physical difficulties of having a tiny child in a place like St Mary's, I needed a reason for Matthew to disappear and then reappear at an age when he could appreciate what was going on around him. And then having done that, I then sent him off to live with the Time Police for a while, and he became indoctrinated, obviously, and then joined them. So I hadn't actually planned it step by step like that, but the underlying reason for everything was that Matthew couldn't be at St Mary's.
So
yes.
you had two questions.
Yeah, the second one is maybe a bit more Max related. I've been interested in how she's been getting iller and iller as time's gone on. And the question earlier was about being at the same time once. And we know that Max kind of flies a bit close to the wind in terms of this. Is this part of the problem, that she goes a bit too far with her safety zones?
Yeah, she's overdone it. In the same way that people get jet lagged, she is time lagged. She's jumped about all over the place, and she hasn't always gone in one direction. In a week, she's gone backwards, forwards, sideways, over there, over there, over there. And it just dawned on me one day that this couldn't be doing her any good, especially after she left St Mary's and was jumping about all over the place. And she'd been at it for some time. So the cumulative effects I tried to show were beginning to build up. And now, of course, St Mary's has instituted a policy where there are a finite number of jumps every year. But all that means is that there's more jeopardy for Max, as for one reason or another, it will be necessary for her to exceed the finite number of jumps. So it's going to be interesting.
Just had a question coming back to the Matthew situation, and whether that was hard to write, because I found it extremely hard to read. A mother of a son who is my whole heart, and I've never put a book down from being upset. Well, once I threw Time Traveller's Wife across a room at the end of it, because I was so angry. But that made me pause and made me shut my Kindle. I'm a prolific reader, it doesn't happen very often. But
Yeah.
you know, as a mother of a son, whether that had an impact on how hard you found that to write, or whether it was...
Okay, there are two answers. It was very hard to write and it was very easy to write. It was very hard to write for exactly the same reason. I've got one of those. And yeah, it is difficult to imagine anything happening to them. So it was very hard to write. But it's one of the few scenes in any of my books where I sat down and wrote for about 12, 14 hours, and it just fell out of my pen, and I got it right, almost right, first time, and I couldn't stop because it was never, ever, ever going to be that good again. I would never be able to pick it up. So I just wrote and wrote and wrote, and then I read it through afterwards, you know, and you change a few words here and there. But I thought, no, I've got this. This is exactly how I wanted it to be. And it came back from my editor at the time with just wow written in the margins. So I thought, yeah, I got it right. Yes.
Yeah, not easy, but totally correct.
Yeah, not easy, but easy.
Yeah.
Do we have any other questions?
So Matthew is technically living out of his time. Theoretically, I think Commander Hay maybe as well. And I wondered whether any of the others, whether there are any other time police staff that are technically illegal.
Well, Mikey is, of course. But no, I think all the others are just regular time police officers. Although I was thinking, wouldn't it be interesting if one of the people at the time police isn't quite what they seem? So that's something I might have to have a bit of a think. I've got a long list of things to think about. It just never stops. But yes, all sorts of things are possible. So we'll see.
Are we getting any more Grint stories? Because we all love Grint.
Yes, I'm writing his scenes at the moment.
I'd love to know how we grew up.
I'm not sure that too much background detail might spoil it. He is just Grint. He's an original. I have plans for him, which is always not necessarily a good thing. Do you mean the combination of Grint and Jane? Yeah. It was the most unlikely pairing I could think of. The scene in the lift where after she's had a go at him and he watches her walk down the corridor, I thought, yes, this might have some possibilities. And I spent a couple of books just pushing them on very gently because neither of them is going to take giant steps forward in this relationship. There's always going to be a lot of embarrassed silences and foot shuffling and staring out of the window while one of them tries to think of something to say. But yeah, the date was such fun to write. I have to say, I loved that. I giggled for hours.
Let's go for the reading, particularly as you just had a nice swig of margarita.
Yeah.
Read with gusto.
Yes. Now, I have a confession to make. I could read from the book, but my eyesight's getting really bad these days. Print is difficult for me. So if nobody minds, I've printed it out in big on this tatty bit of paper. So look at this, but think that.
Isn't it a lovely cover?
Yeah. Oh God, it's gorgeous, isn't it? Oh yes. Just to set the scene, if you remember from the last book, Saving Time, Jane and Luke had a bit of a row, and all of them had declared that they didn't want to work with each other ever again. So now the time has come to resolve that situation. In another part of the building, Team 236 were seated in their tiny office, looking everywhere except at each other. If any of them remembered the excitement and anticipation of their first day's occupation and the plans they had to make it more comfortable, none of them were saying anything now. There was a table and 4 chairs, even though there were only 3 of them. Normal teams consisted of 4 officers. In this matter, as in every other, Team 236 did not conform. Over in the corner stood an illegal bookcase stuffed with books, papers, a broken scratch pad, a mug full of mouldy coffee dregs no one would own, 2 unmatched socks and a tube of hand cream. Various posters adorned the walls. A sunset, Jane's, the periodic table, Matthew's, a young woman on a tennis court scratching her bare bottom. No prizes for guessing the owner of that one, but apparently it was art. On top of the illegal bookcase, an illegal coffee machine bubbled away, illegally. They had been there for some time. Meaningful discussions had not taken place. Issues had not been resolved. A solution to their team breakdown had not been mooted, discussed, and agreed. A possible way forwards had not been discovered. The coffee machine gave a final roar. Matthew stood up, poured the coffee, placed a mug in front of each of his teammates, and sat back down again. 3 people sipped in silence. "Well," said Luke eventually, "since no one's going anywhere until we get this sorted, and since I'm the one with the most to regret, I suppose I'd better start the ball rolling." He turned to Jane, sitting with her back to the bottom scratcher. "Jane, I apologise for the things I said to you. As you may be aware, I'm not too balanced on the subject of our friends the Portmans, and suddenly to discover that you are one was rather a shock. However, that's no excuse. Matthew, I'm not sure what I might have said or done to upset you, but I'm sure I'll have done something. This is me, after all. So I apologise to you too. If either of you feel you can't accept my apologies, then I think everything ends here, and we inform the Major accordingly. And even if you feel you can accept them, then we still need to discuss whether we can continue to work together. As a team, I mean. I'm not sure what would happen next, but I think if we went to Ellis and said the team had suffered irretrievable breakdown, then they'd reallocate us. Jane, I'm certain that 235 would welcome you with open arms, and Matthew could divide his time between the time map and assisting Mikey in her underground bunker. I don't think any of that would be a problem." Jane looked at him. "What about you? Where would you work?" "Oh, I think it's a given no one will want me, and I'm not sure I'd want to work with anyone who would have me. Relations with my dad are better. He'd find me a job if I asked, although I'm not sure I would. Ask, I mean. I might strike out on my own a bit, see where that takes me." He sipped his coffee. "What you're saying," said Matthew, "is that if we break up the team, then you'll have nowhere to go." "Matthew, my dad's one of the richest people on the planet. I'm not going to starve. Besides, he'll be plotting his revenge against the Portmans for kidnapping him. He might need me to give him a hand with that, which I'll be very happy to do." Matthew looked across at Jane. "Jane, how would you feel about applying to join 235? "I'm not sure," said Jane slowly. "I'm sorry, I'm still a bit thrown by the death of my grandmother. And the other thing, about my parents, who they were and how they died. A lot has happened recently, and I still don't know how I feel about some of it." Then you should consult me, said Luke. I am still your team leader after all. It's my job to advise on personal problems. And even if we do decide to go our separate ways, as the one outside the team, I'll be able to provide a valuable perspective. You see, as always, I'm the important one around here. Jane had to smile. Matthew, who had been watching Luke carefully, said, "Never mind us, Luke. What do you want?" Luke paused. What did he want? His life had changed irrevocably, and so had he. He had a greater insight into the burdens carried by his father. He'd rediscovered his mother, and there was another relationship to be built and cherished. Then there was Imogen Farnborough, kidnapped, abused by the Portmans, for which they would pay heavily. She was sick, broken down, fearful. If he left the time police, he could spend more time with her. He missed the old Immy spitting fire at him. Yes, there was no doubt, if he left the time police, if he regarded this as a natural ending to his career, he could devote more time to Immy, to getting to know his mother, possibly doing something worthwhile with his life. But he'd enjoyed his time here. He had responsibility, a purpose. Somehow, life here, difficult as it could frequently be, was more enjoyable than fast cars, faster women, and very fast money. However, he was the first to recognise this. He was Luke Parrish, and sooner or later, Luke Parrish always screwed up, wrecked everything he touched. And not only his own life, he still couldn't think about Audroy Tannhauser, the boy, really, who had killed himself because of what he, Luke, had done. The guilt would never leave him, nor should it, he supposed. He shook himself free of these thoughts. I tell you what, he said, let's have a secret ballot. Yes, if we want to continue in 236. No, if we all fancy a bright, shiny new future. And if we want to keep the same team together, it has to be unanimous. 2-1 is no good. It has to be all of us. Agreed? They nodded. Jane, bring forth your trusty notebook. Jane brought out her by now rather dog-eared notebook, carefully pulled out a page and tore it into 3, passing one piece to Matthew and one to Luke. They could only rustle up one pen between them, so she carefully placed it in the centre of the table. They all looked at it. Do we have to decide now? Inquired Matthew. I think so, said Luke. Ellis said we can't come out until we do, and it's not like you to miss lunch, is it? But if you really want more time, I don't see why not. We could send Jane out for some toast, you know, because she's the girl on the team and catering is her responsibility. See that pen? Said Bolshy Jane. You know what to do, sweetie. Straight up his left nostril, through his sinuses and into his brain. All problems solved, and you and Matthew can go off and have a nice lunch. Although you'll probably need a new pen. Actually, said Wimpy Jane, timidly putting forward her point of view, I think he wants to stay. He talks about a fresh start outside the time police, and he may mean it now. But I think once he's back in his own world, the old Luke Parrish will soon come back, and he knows it. The old Luke Parrish never went away, said Bolshy Jane bluntly. And anyway, it's not our job to sort his life out. Jane should do what is best for Jane, not what's best for him. Slowly, Matthew reached out, picked up the pen, made a mark on the paper, folded it up small, and replaced the pen. Slowly, without meeting anyone's gaze, Luke reached out, picked up the pen, made a mark on the paper, folded it up small, and replaced the pen. They both looked at Jane. No pressure then, said Bolshy Jane chattily. Jane picked up the pen, made a mark on her paper, folded it up small, and put the pen back in her pocket, because it was her pen after all. They regarded the 3 folded slips. Shall I do the honours? Said Luke. They nodded. He reached out, made the classic nothing up my sleeve gesture, unfolded the nearest scrap and smoothed it out. I'm assuming Y is for yes. Matthew nodded. Luke sighed. This was supposed to be anonymous. Oh, for heaven's sake, said Matthew, you know that wasn't your vote. Jane knows it wasn't hers. That only leaves me. Get a move on, I want my lunch. Luke unfolded the second slip and laid it face up on the table. Yes. Well, that one was mine, he said, so it's all on you, Jane. Does the team continue or not? He reached for the third slip, and then the fire alarm went off.
Well done, that was
Oh,
brilliant.
thank you. Sorry, streaming eyes. Not good eyesight.
I'd like to thank you all for coming. It's been such a fun night, and it's been really nice to see some old faces and some new ones, and I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you very much, Jodi, for
My pleasure.
not answering some questions.
Yes,
and,
I enjoyed that.
doing the readings, and I hope you really all enjoy the book. And review it everywhere, please. Tell all your friends about it. And we hope to see you all again soon, don't we?
September.
September. There's going to be another launch here in September.
Small Hope and
Small
Pennyroyal.
Hope and Pennyroyal. And,
Bring peacock feathers.
yeah, I think we might have a colour theme for that one. And we might see if we can try and organise a group going up in the lift, because that would be fun too. It really is worth it. So, yeah.
Yes, I can embarrass myself all over again.
So, thank you again very much for
Yes,
coming.
thank you for coming.
I was literally walking along and my face